access to the opportunity to vote. Yes, it is a challenge, my good friends. And now the question is, what is the president and the United States Congress going to do moving forward? What do you think the president and the vice president should be doing moving forward? That's the conversation today. I am your host, Leon Rock, and this is All Things Black Politics on Boston Black News. Well, the challenge is great in America with COVID-19 or the Omicron virus. Yes, that situation that we find ourselves in after 2 years is not going away. In Massachusetts or around the country, here in Washington, D.C. as well, the numbers are horrific. But there appears to be no agenda on the federal government side to essentially escape from the virus. Yes, like escape from New York, escape from the virus, my good friends. What should we do? What should the United States government here in Washington, D.C. be doing to address the Omicron virus? And actually, what should it be doing in relationship to, yes, the right to vote? I'm taken aback by it all because guess what? I feel like in many ways we're in the 1960s, in the 1950s, when a great doctor, Dr. Martin Luther King, fought for the rights of Blacks to vote. And here we find ourselves 60 to 70 years later doing the same thing. It's interesting that here in Washington, D.C., at the United States Senate, they are using the filibuster to have southern states, essentially, Republican states, in the South decide on if Black folks will have the right to vote. How are you feeling about that? I'm not feeling good, my good friends. And I'm sure that you have a conversation to give as well. 617-282-7794 is the telephone number where you can call in to find out how to link up to the Zoom to actually have a conversation about this and other issues that impact the African-American community, particularly as it relates to Washington, D.C. Yeah, the President of the United States just recently held a press conference just 2 days ago. And in the press conference that happened and actually was for 2 hours, he talked about everything imaginable. But one thing that he didn't talk about was how he planned to address the challenge that the Senate has brought to his office in regards to the whole issue of the voting rights bill. Yeah, they brought it to his office because guess what? He wasn't bringing it to the United States Senate in a real way until 2 days before the vote. 2 days before the vote, he goes up to the United States Senate and members of his own party, 2 members of the Democratic Party, said, guess what? We are not voting with the Democrats on this issue. We're going to side with the Republicans. Well, the question is, how is the president and the vice president going to address this particular issue? I'm not sure if they have a real plan. Nope, I'm not sure that they have a real plan because the filibuster is continuing to exist. and he is not able to get his legislative agenda moved forward. Yes, his legislative agenda is stalled in the United States Senate. Well, he has the numbers in the House of Representatives for now. But in the future, one has to wonder, is even the United States Senate will be controlled by the Democrats. And by the way, why is the president and the vice president not willing to call out those Democrats that did not support the rule change to actually allow this voting rights bill to move forward in the United States Senate? That's the question of the day here on All Things Black Politics. Yes, live from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Leon Rock. 617-282-7794 is the call-in number. And by the way, this is Zoom Live, so you have to get the Zoom link to be able to get on the program and have a conversation with us. You can contact, yes, Boston Black News at 617-282-7794 or 617-282-0685, and they will provide the link to you probably via email, possibly through email, but they'll give you a telephone number as well to call in. 617-282-7794 is the call-in number. Well, I'll tell you, the Zoom link is on Facebook Live, so I'm glad to see that and hear that as well. So everyone can link in, and everyone that has an interest in getting in touch with us can go to the Zoom link that is live here on Boston Black News. Thank you very much for that opportunity to actually have a conversation with you. So we're looking forward to having a conversation with you. Please, I'll tell you, here's the deal, my good friends. Here is the deal. In Washington, D.C., now, in Washington, D.C., a location that I'm right around the corner at, the United States Congress, they are actually not passing legislation that will assist us in our own freedom, in our own movement, in our own right to access voting. Here's the deal. Across the country, from Georgia to places in between, they are passing and have passed legislation. Check this out. Legislation that will actually call for you. And I know you've heard it. Get this, in Georgia, they have legislation that a law now that if you share or give water to someone that is in line during voting, that's a misdemeanor offense and you can be charged, arrested. Yeah, misdemeanor. Or they'll give you a ticket, or where you have to pay some money because you gave some money to a senior, or you gave money to money. You gave a drink of some water or a beverage to a person in line while in hot temperatures. You know how it gets hot in hot Atlanta. It can be 90, 100 degrees. You can be in line for an hour, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours just to vote. We've seen the experience happen in the great state of Georgia. Now they're saying, guess what? If you give water to someone, guess what? You've broken the law. You have broken the law. What kind of insane stuff is that? That's insane, my good friends. That is insane. We got to do better. But we can't do better if the federal government isn't doing what it's supposed to do. We cannot do better if the federal government doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Now, the question is, will the federal government do what it's supposed to do? Will the president and vice president do what they are supposed to do? How are they doing over the past year? Are we better off? Are we better off as a nation based on the experience that we have had with, yes, the president and vice president? Have they been able to grab a hold of this virus? Have they been able to grab a hold of the economy? Have they been able to grab a hold of the ability of Black folks and other folks to have access, equal access to voting? Have they been able to grab a hold of the challenges of the economy? Listen, my good friends. Oh yeah, today I have a whole bunch of conversation for you. And by the way, I have a whole bunch of conversation for you because guess what? I am, like so many other people in our community, I'm just a little bit peeved off at what has been happening here in Washington, D.C. as of late. The women in our communities across the United States and the women of our communities in Boston that have children, that money that they had been receiving for, I guess, about 4 to 6 months is gone. Yeah, for the children's tax credit. It's history. As of January, that money has gone. The United States Congress has not supported the additional dollars that, by the way, Biden and Kamala Harris, what you know who I'm talking about, the vice president, just frustrated, my good friends. I am frustrated that that money is not made available to the poor and working poor of our communities, and folks are struggling. That's the reality. Folks are struggling. And it seems as though Washington, D.C. could give a royal crap. Can I say that word on this show? I hope so. Yeah, the government seems not to care less about, yeah, the working poor and the poor. Some people will say, well, he passed some legislation. Some legislation is not good enough. He called himself the president recently called himself the Senate president or the senator president. What are you talking about? How are you? You're not a senator. You're the president of the United States. And by the way, if you were a senator, and if you knew exactly how the Senate ran, which you did because you were a member of the Senate for 30 some odd years or even more, you should have been able to move that bill, that civil rights bill, forward. How come the African American community is not calling out? How come the African American community, by and large, is not calling out the president and vice president for their ineptness in getting that legislation through? And why do I say that ineptness? Is because of the fact that two members of their own party held it up and stopped it from passing. Two members. And he and she couldn't get those two members to vote for the legislation of our lifetime to protect the rights of Black folks and other folks to vote, particularly in those deep South states and those deep South counties that are becoming obstructionists to the opportunity for Black folks to vote. Answer me that, my good friends. Answer me that. 617-282-7794 is the telephone number. You can call in, or on Facebook Live, you can see the link to be able to come on in and be part of the conversation today. Again, if you don't have that Facebook Live link, you can contact 617-282-0685 or 617-282-7794. They will be able to provide you with the link to this broadcast. I'm so happy to be here today. Yeah, I know I don't sound like I'm as happy as I would like to be. And guess what? I'm not. I'm not that happy in relationship to what is going on here in Washington, D.C. in relationship to Black folks. The Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Bill, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act has not been passed. Has not been passed. And we got to do something about it. We have to do something about it in Massachusetts, my hometown of Boston. We need to do something here in Washington, D.C. We need to do something about it in all the states of the United States of America. We have to essentially become activists again. We have to become noisemakers again. We have to essentially move this process forward. We have to, even during COVID-19, we should be involved in a letter writing campaign to our senators, particularly those senators that stopped the voting rights legislation from moving forward. We have to do it. We ought to do it. We must do it. Why? Because it's right. Because it's important for us to do the right thing. If we don't do this right thing, generation after generation after generation of Black folks are going to be hurting. Hold on, wait a minute. There's something else I have to say. Oh, yeah, this is my saying moment today. There's something else I have to say, and that is this, is that there are Republicans in the United States Senate and the United States House that are running scared, just like America is running scared. And why is it running scared? Why are they putting this block, this mountain in front of our ability to vote across the United States of America? Why are they so scared of Blacks and Latinos and other minorities? Let's call it the way it is, my good friends. Let's call it the way it truly is. Here's the deal, and let's be candid. In the United States, in the next 20 years, Blacks, Latinos, and Asians, and other people of color will be the majority in this country. And because of that fact, people are running scared. The Republicans are running scared. They are attempting to gerrymander every political, for the lack of a better word, pocket. Every political district in the United States to support the agenda of the Republicans and to lessen the impact of Democrats and independents from voting in those districts. To be able to do what even South Africa was not willing to do. To go down and fight for white supremacy. That's a fact, my good friends. That's where it's at, my good friends. Is that what is going on in the United States of America, in the House of Representatives, and in the United States Senate is a plan to support white supremacy at all cost. That's a fact. Why do I say that? Just look at the facts. Who would support a former president, by the way, the one that got elected for 4 years and they threw the person out? I'm talking about Trump. And we put in President Biden. Now we find ourselves in a situation where the Republicans in the House and the Senate are saying, running scared, that we want to limit the ability of Black folks, and let's call it the way it is, and they do indicate other minorities, but it's essentially for Black folks. We want to limit the way Black folks are able to vote in all those areas in the South in particular. Georgia, Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, all those and more southern states, Louisiana. We want to limit the ability of Black folks to vote so we can stay in power. Because if we allow the Black folks to vote, then guess what? We know that those Black folks, because they did it in Georgia, we know that those Black folks are going to say, throw out the bombs and keep in or vote in progressive folks. And then all of a sudden, the United States Senate changes, and all of a sudden, the United States House of Representatives change, and then we have true democracy. But that's not going to happen right now, based on the fact that they weren't able to, well, the United States Senate wasn't able to get those 2 U.S. senators who are Democrats to vote the right thing. So this white supremacy attitude in the House of Representatives on the Republican side and on the Senate side, these Republicans want to limit the ability of Black folks and others, to throw the bums out. And by the way, this is essentially a way to save themselves, to keep it going, to keep it going, to keep it going. Enough, my friends. Enough. We have to do better. And how do we do better? Elect good people into the House of Representatives, into the United States Senate, and pass the voting rights bill. That's my opinion. I could be wrong. This is Boston Black News, all things Black politics. I'm your host, Leon Rock. Over the next number of weeks, we're going to have candidates that are running for office in Boston, Massachusetts on all things Black politics. We're going to ramp it up again with the candidates. Yeah, there's a candidate that is running for, actually, for sheriff in Suffolk County. Two candidates, from what I understand. There could be more, but two major candidates for the office of sheriff, the current sheriff, and a staff member or former staff member of the sheriff's department is running as well. A woman. We're going to have them on the program. We're going to make those invites to them. And we have members of our community that are running for Secretary of State as well as governor. We're going to have them on as well here on all things Black politics on Boston Black News. In the next number of weeks, we're going to have them on as well. You know how we do. We bring it right to you. So expect to hear from those people that are actually running for public office. It should be very exciting because I guess for the sheriff's position, this should be an exciting race, as well as for the governorship and, yes, a senatorial seat in the 2nd Suffolk District. There's a number of candidates running, and we're going to have them all on because we're an equal opportunity broadcast. And what we do is we bring them all together and actually give them equal access of an hour's time, well, 55 minutes time, to actually share with us what they plan to do for in our communities. So I'm expecting some excitement over the next 2 to 3 to 4 weeks. Actually, with all those candidates, actually, we'll probably have even more than 3 to 4 weeks because there's a lot of candidates. And we're going to try to bring them all. We're going to offer all of them to come here to share their thoughts, their opinions, and their observations on what needs to be done for the African American community specifically, but for the Boston community by and large, here on All Things Black Politics on Boston Black News. I'm your host, Leon Rock. Well, I've been talking about Boston and I've been talking about Washington, D.C. over the past, well, half an hour, talking about issues of politics and talking about issues that are important to the African American community. And the biggest thing for me is the voting rights. And by the way, I gotta comment just a little bit more about this voting rights thing. I'm not trying to dog it in any way, but I have to say that I'm just so disappointed. I'm thinking that you are too, that this John Lewis bill was not able to get through the Senate. And who caused this? The Democrats. It's, you know what? People wanted to, the Democrats in the United States Senate, trying to support the president, essentially tried to make an excuse for the president and say it's the Republicans, it's the folks on the far right alone that caused this bill not to pass. Wrong. The reality is that it was the Democrats that couldn't stick together as usual in Washington, D.C., to actually make sure that the Voting Rights Act was passed. It was the Democrats, 2 Democrats, because guess what? The vice president was ready, willing, and able to get out there and vote her conscience and vote in support of the Voting Rights Act. But she didn't get the opportunity to break the tie because guess what? 2 Democrats stood in the way. And Joe Manchin is not a Democrat. I'm going to say it again. Joe Manchin is not a Democrat. He's a Republican. He's a Republican, my good friends. Yeah, well, he says that he's a Democrat. But in my humble opinion, he's a Republican. And I could be wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. 617-282-7794 or 617-282-0685 are the telephone numbers if you want to get online. If you would, just get online and have a conversation with me today. I'm looking at some notes here. The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is facing fierce criticism for his comments he made this week in response to the question about concerns about voters of color. Virginia Democratic Representative Donald Mahegan condemned the remark in a letter to the Kentucky Republican, saying, "I am writing today in response to your recent comment on voting rights in which you insinuated, I apologize, that the African Americans are somehow not American citizens. This is 2022, and being American is not synonymous with looking or thinking like you. African Americans are, in fact, American citizens deserving our recognition, respect, and equal protection under the law." As at the Republicans' Leadership Weekly News Conference held on Wednesday, Latino Rebels reporter Pablo Martinez asked McConnell what his message was to voters of color who were concerned they would not be able to vote in the midterms and Congress failed to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Pretty interesting stuff right there. Mitch McConnell, you know, the guy that said that Barack Obama's presidency would be a failure because guess what? He's not allowing any legislation to pass under Barack Obama. And guess what? He did it. Here's the other deal. Is Mitch McConnell could care less about African Americans, just like all the Republican United States Senate, including the former governor of Massachusetts. You know who I'm talking about, who is the United States Senator now of Utah. Yeah, that guy right there is questionable. I'll tell you, the only stand-up person, and by the way, she stand up when she wants to, and then rejects us when she wants to as well, and she could have crossed the line. And that is, the former, the former vice president of the United States, daughter, who is on the commission investigating the insurrection. She could have crossed the line as a senator, Republican senator, and supported the voting rights bill, but she didn't. There's a whole bunch of folks that could have voted in support of the voting rights bill and didn't, my good friends. And for that, I'm disappointed. And for that, I'm dismayed. And for that, I am, yes, I can say it, I'm angry at the fact that Here in 2022, we are still on our knees asking others to give us the opportunity to vote. Why in 2022 are we continuing to be on our knees, as Malcolm would probably say? Why are we on our knees asking for the right to vote? Get up off your knees. Get up off our knees and stand up and ask and demand for the right to vote. Get up off our knees and stand up. And that's the problem, is that we have not been standing up. In the United States House of Representatives, and I respect the Black brothers and sisters that are trying to do the right thing, but I'll tell you what, in the United States House of Representatives, we are at loss right now for good, strong Black leadership. Yes, we are. We are at loss for good, strong Black leadership. Because when the president, and I understand he got this COVID-19 stuff and the economy and all the rest, but baseline, the most important thing that Black folks have is their health, their education, and our ability to vote. Their health, their education, and our ability to vote. And we should never, ever compromise any of those things. Zero of that. This is Leon Rock, and this is All Things Black Politics. Yes, on Boston Black News. And if you would like to call in, you can call in at 929-436-2866, and we'll let you in. Again, 929-436-2866. That is the call-in number. Let me give it to you again. 929-436-2866. This is All Things Black Politics. It's January 21st, 2022. If you're watching a rebroadcast of this, unfortunately, that number will not be available. If you're watching a rebroadcast of this broadcast today, unfortunately, that number will not be available after 12 o'clock on January 21st, 2022. That number again is 929-436-2866. Let's talk about this for a second. Here we are in Washington, D.C. This is where I am broadcasting live. Here's the deal, my good friends. Is in Washington, D.C., we have a major challenge, many major challenges. But the big major challenge is actually, in many ways, Black folks. Hold on. Black folks. How can I say it nicely? Well, I'm just going to say it. Black folks in the United States Congress have not been doing the right thing. They've been trying to pass legislation. And by the way, I salute them for their work in attempting to pass the legislation. But here's the deal. When it comes to the president and the vice president getting on their bully pulpit in support of the legislation and essentially bending some arms, bending some legs, bending. I've said this at the previous broadcast, and I've said this for some time, is that we could learn a lot. And actually, the former senator and now President Biden could learn a lot from LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Remember, back in the 1960s, after Lyndon Baines Johnson took over as President of the United States after the unfortunate death and killing of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders of that time urged LBJ, who was a Dixiecrat, who was representing his own district in own state of Texas, and who was known to be, in many ways, a bigot himself. But he knew how to maneuver the United States Senate, as did Richard Nixon, LBJ, back in 60s, 64 and 65 to be exact, started bending some arms, bending some legs. When I say bending arms and bending legs, metaphorical. Yeah. I don't mean that he's really bending arms and bending legs, but he was in many ways. He had dossiers on everybody. He had folders on everyone, all the politicians. He knew the dirt on all the politicians. And in knowing the dirt on all the politicians, like Nixon, he bent arms and legs and said, hey, guess what? Here's the deal. You're going to support this civil rights legislation, Republicans. Because if you don't, here's what I know and here's what I'll do. That's up to you. He knew how to maneuver the system. Unfortunately, the President of the United States seems to not, as a former senator, know how to maneuver the system. And by the way, the system is the system. I don't care if these folks have gone so right wing that they just went Ku Klux Klan right on folks. It is a different Senate. But still, when you got the goods on folks, you can maneuver them in a certain way. And guess what? Joe Biden, following in the footsteps of Barack Obama, has shown a certain weakness. Don't get me wrong now. Don't think I'm a hater of Barack Obama. I'm not. I thought he was a fantastic president with the limitations that he had. Well, Joe Biden is finding himself in the same position as Barack Obama. He was supposed to come out and essentially, with all due respect, shove it right down their throat. I'm talking about the Republicans and the filibuster and the legislation that he wanted to get passed. Just go right ahead and charge forward. Forget all this negotiation that he said he wanted to do, bipartisan. That bipartisan stuff is a no-go. So my humble observation here in Washington, D.C. is the president and the vice president and the black members of the United States Congress, you all screwed up big time with the Voting Rights Act. You really did. You didn't know what you needed to do to actually get this legislation passed. And by the way, you didn't meet the way you needed to meet. You didn't work with the Republicans and get someone of them, two or three on your side. That's all you needed was two or three on your side, and you got that voting rights bill passed. But you didn't do it for whatever reason. And then you couldn't even get the two Democrats on the United States Senate to go where you needed to go. So it was a failure on the part of our president, our vice president, the Congressional Black Caucus, and other entities in the House of Representatives and the United States Senate that actually kind of, sort of messed it all up. And where do we go from here? As I said just a few moments ago, we can learn a lot from LBJ. We can learn a lot from Richard Milhous Nixon. See, a lot of people had a lot of problems with Richard Nixon. Of course we did, Watergate. But there's one thing you have to agree with. There is one thing that you must agree with. And that is that Nixon knew how to get legislation passed. Yeah, when he wanted the OEO program, yeah, and all the other economic development programs that helped out Black folks, the CETA programs and the whole 9 yards. You remember the CETA program? So you old school folks, you remember the CETA program, Comprehensive Employment and Training Program under Richard Nixon. Helped out a whole bunch of Black folks and a whole bunch of other folks in getting career opportunities and getting job opportunities back in the day. You remember the OIC programs, Opportunities Industrialization programs. Yeah, we even had one in Boston, right down there at Dudley Street. You remember those programs? Well, those programs supported by Richard Nixon, he got Republicans to support economic development in the African American communities across America. That's a fact, Jack. So I say we can learn a lot from Nixon, and we can learn a lot from LBJ. And we can learn a lot in the Black community of Boston moving forward with making sure that as we have this conversation about voting rights, and as we have a conversation with our elected officials, they are on board with the conversation about the right to vote and making sure that, yes, our right to vote is not impeded in any way, shape, or form. Well, Boston is good, I believe, because, it's more of a progressive state than those southern states. I think we're good, but we need to be advocates in Boston's community to make sure that the voting rights bill passes. That's it. That's all. We have to. It's a must. We have to be advocates. So that's what I'm saying today. And I got about 4 or 5 minutes left in this broadcast. And yes, today's broadcast has been observational broadcast. I gave you my observations on what is going on in Washington, here in Washington, D.C., about Black folks and our own empowerment. Our own empowerment, my good friends. We have to take charge. And the Congressional Black Caucus in Washington, D.C. has to do a better job. Our president has to do a better job. Our vice president has to do a better job. And if they begin to do a better job, I can see rainbows and a light for Black America's future. But it's up to them, really. And it's up to us to make sure that they do what they need to do. This is Boston Black News. This is all things Black politics. This is Leon Rock. I appreciate you all. I'm so glad that you have joined me today to talk about politics in the African American community of Boston. I'm sorry that I had to just kind of spill my gut on this whole issue of voting rights and how I'm feeling. But at the same time, I'm not sorry. Why am I going to be sorry about that? This is what I do. I have a conversation with you about the politics of Boston and how, the politics of Washington impact the African American community of Boston and around the country. I'm so glad that you were here to share with me my observations and opinions on what is going on in Washington, D.C. as it relates to the Voting Rights Act, as it relates to the empowerment of Black folks. And we have to do better. This has been Leon Rock, and this is the African American Experience on Boston Black News with all things Black politics. I will see you again next week at this time, and hopefully I'll have on the show, on the broadcast, a couple of good candidates for the offices of sheriff for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Suffolk County Sheriff. And those two candidates, I'm going to have them on one week after another. We're attempting to schedule that now. And so look forward to that broadcast next week with the candidate or candidates for Sheriff of Suffolk County. Again, thank you. Mayor of Boston. This is